I think a big question and a very interesting question is the using of analog equipment and digital equipment, and it's very, I think, popular at the moment to work with vintage tools. It's in everybody talks about it.
Is this a digital process? Vintage tools, or you mean?
I mean, with vintage tools,
you mean authentic vintage tools?
Yeah, I mean the old stuff, the old equipment, like compressors and EQs from Pultec or Neve or like this. Okay, do you use such analog equipment, and what is the role of the modern plugins?
Very difficult.
I think it's a difficult
very,
question.
Very difficult.
A very interesting question, I hope.
I'm working with a lot of analog stuff, but not vintage stuff. Not old stuff, say, I think the oldest one is API 2500 bus compressors from...
I have one of those too.
Yeah, this sounds great. When did they build it?
Oh, it's been around since the 70s.
The bus compressor too?
The 2500, yeah. Well, not that particular model, but the same inside electronics, the 2520 op amp, and the VCAs. The model of VCA that's in there was originally a DBX, but then they moved over to the that. But it's basically the same design, and they've tried to emulate the same output transformers, and the philosophy is the same.
Okay, I'm working with vintage gear.
No, it's vintage. It's vintage classic, and for rock and roll, it kicks ass.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Sometimes for jazz music too. For my opinion, for my working, I can't say if it's better digital or analog. It's better the modeling in the computer. If you got plugins of, for example, of this API 2500, the wonderful plugins to use it, but I always work with the original. Not because I have it, it's for me more easier. I put the knobs, I feel the knobs, and I can do...
We call that ergonomics, the human use, the feel. If you can get there faster and easier, and you have the touch...
I can do sound with this analog stuff. And if I use it, if I try to do it with the digital stuff, I'm not able to do music, to do sound.
Do you have any of the Vice gear?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, but that's digital, but it feels a lot like analog because the knobs are real.
But I'm more, if I just talk about this API stuff to do punch in a rock and roll, I'm not able to do it with the Vice.
No,
and I need
you're
about
correct.
half a second with the API, for example.
Each tool for each job.
Exactly, yeah.
But in a purist, but if you
way.
were trying to do a very purist, transparent recording, you might use the Vice over the API any day.
Of course, absolutely, of course. But for me, it's more easier to work with the analog stuff. My feeling, to feel the knobs, to feel the voltage inside, I don't know what it is.
It's funny, though, to the audience listening, this idea of feeling it sounds very abstract. But think about if you get into a car that you know well, you sit in there, you're comfortable, and you turn on the ignition, you just go for it, your eyes are closed, and you grab the steering wheel, and it has a certain feel, and you can take off. That's very hard to do with a plug-in.
But there are a lot of competitions between the plug-in and the original stuff.
Yes.
And a lot of people say they sound very near together. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I think that plugins have gotten a lot better
in
the past 5 years. It's actually an exponential slope. What I thought was a piece of crap conceptually 5 or 10 or 15 years ago has gotten much better. I could get specific if you want to take some time and talk about individual models and types, but I actually do use some plugins now that where 5 or 10 years ago I would never have thought of it. They often sounded harsh and small, and they had what I like to call digititis. It just didn't have the purity of tone of the analog, but that is changing. slowly, but it's
Yeah.
changing. Digital, it's easy to make things sound cold. Analog, it's easy to make things sound warm. But with digital, the better digital, it's easier to make things sound transparent and not add any artifacts. With analog, you have to be careful not to add artifacts unless the artifact is desirable. Excuse me. There are tube emulators in the digital world. I'm trying to. I don't think there's any that are close to the sound of real tubes. Okay. But that's something that's still to be conquered. But there are some plugins that come closer and closer. There are tape emulation plugins that now I feel are darn good. You may have a different opinion, but I think the UAD ATR 102, which emulates the Ampex, and the UAD Studer A800 are doing an amazing job. Have you ever heard either of
Yeah.
those? And what do you think?
I like it. It sounds good.
There you go.
Absolutely. It's the same thing on other plugins. They sound very well. But for me, it's easier to bring sound with originals than with the plugins. I don't know why. That's my question.
Does that mean that you're going to, if you feel you need tape, that you'll put up a tape machine and
Yeah.
transfer to it and
Yeah.
from it?
Yeah.
I must say I'm more practical than that.
No, of course. But for me, it's easier to make the sound with originals. And I don't know why. I just ask me why I'm doing this.
If it works for you, don't
Yeah.
stop.
I just bought a compressor last week for about 5,000 euros.
What is it?
Vertigo.
I haven't
The
heard of it.
plugin costs about 250. And the
Oh,
sounds
there's a plugin that emulates this?
Yeah, and it sounds very good, this plugin. And sometimes I'm asking me, I'm stupid? 5,000 euros? But I use it, I got a wonderful sound of it. Now I tried the plugin once more. Yeah, yes,
What?
I don't know why.
Well, and neither one of us is probably wanting to take a double-blind test to prove it,
Yeah.
as long as it works. I have to try someday, if I ever had the spare time, a real, true blind test. But I don't even know if there can be a true blind test, because it takes, you really have to live with something long enough to, all I can say accurately is that some of these plugins are coming much closer than ever. And so the question that arises is, and it was asked to me, someone asked me, can I start, and I'm going to use quotation marks, can I start a budget mastering studio with just plugins? And that opened up a whole can of worms, and ultimately I said, well, actually, forget talking about the plugins and the processes and start by listening to music and good recordings and get really used to them. Make sure you have a great room first and great reproduction system before you even think about any processing at all, because you have to know what it should sound like and accurately make that judgment before you start turning the knobs. And I also said, and apprentice with a good mastering engineer for several years before you turn any knobs. That's what I would suggest.
Okay. I have another question. And,
No
yeah. Well, SAE Institute is an education institute, and have you got some tips for younger students, for younger guys who want to become a mastering engineer?
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Ask Chris first.
Yeah, Chris, what do you think about it?
I think what Bob says the whole time, listen, 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 listen. Listen carefully, analyze what you're hearing and why you are hearing this. And when you try to do some mastering, just a little EQing, just compare always the original with your mastered stuff and
At
the same
equal
loudness.
loudness, right.
Exactly.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
And just do it not once, thousands of times. Just control. Is it better what you're doing than the original? Always mastered version had to be better than the original version. Compare it, compare it, compare it, compare it. At the same level, at the same loudness.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's my.
Can't argue with that. Did you learn from another mastering engineer?
No. From recording engineers, I learned a lot.
Interesting, yeah.
While mastering, doing very little mastering, they told me what they want to hear, like to hear, and I learned very much from them.
Mm-hmm. I had many mentors.
Yeah.
But I started out as an audiophile and an audiophile engineer, and I knew a lot about what was underneath the equipment technically, so I wasn't afraid to work on my equipment until it worked out. My advice, again, duplicates what you have to say. If we pause for a second, I'll think about some tidbit. Give me a second. It's hard with the lights and the heat to come up with an answer since we already had an answer. I have an answer. Okay. Become familiar with the sound of every type of music. Don't just be a fan of techno or electronica or rock and roll. Be very open to the sound of everything from opera to classical to jazz, because it will open up your mind and your experience. That's what I would say. If you're just a specialist in one type of music, you'll be obsolete in 2 years when that music is obsolete.
So, I think the result is music is all our engine, yeah, keeps them moving. And many, many thanks for being here at the masterclass in SAE Cologne. And hope you're coming back to us.
I need to. I need another day or two to cover it all.
Yeah, many questions. It's unbelievable. Yeah, and we had another day tomorrow, so it will be very interesting. Thank you very much for being here. And okay, guys, thank you for your interest, and see you later.